Okay, and so if there are any questions on any or all of the above, we'll take them now. Okay.
Chief, can you talk about the evidence that was taken out of here? What, how many weapons, how much money, any kind of interesting stories about the evidence?
I don't want to get into specifics.
Interesting stories.
There's a lot of interesting stories, I'm sure. This warehouse has been here for a long time, and but I will say that I made an initial assessment, and I found that we sometimes store large quantities of things that we don't need to store, and maybe don't store in places that are the best places to store them. So I took what I viewed as the highest risk items and then moved them to proper and more secure facilities. Let's just say that there's always different ways of doing things, and I think that sometimes we get stuck in the old ways of doing things, and we've allowed things to back up, and I think that there's a better way to store or manage high-risk items. So those items have been moved out of here in the last 4 weeks.
You're talking drugs, weapons?
Well, I'd say there are a lot of things that would be considered high risk for long-term storage. Those include weapons, money, and any high-value items.
Alice?
Can you describe the conditions, the current conditions of the facility?
Yeah, this warehouse we've been here for decades, and the condition of the warehouse has deteriorated over the years. But in addition to the just facility itself, the way that the facility is run on a paper-based system adds to, and the overcrowding because of lack of staffing has all added to poor working conditions for my employees. That's the bottom line. The building needs some work, which we are working to get done now, so we can, in the short term, make the working conditions for the employees better. So again, improving heating and air conditioning, ventilation, lighting, some of those things. But again, there's also a process that we need to engage in. I have to commit resources to this warehouse so that evidence that can be purged, that is no longer needed, can be removed and destroyed, because that again creates an unsafe, unhealthy working environment for my employees.
Can you say more or less how many pieces of evidence are there? Is it hundreds of thousands? Or
Millions.
Millions.
Yeah. Over 1 million pieces of evidence. Not all of those items are evidence. A lot of the items that, when we did our initial assessment, were at a point where they were no longer needed as evidence and had been cleared and released and can either be auctioned or destroyed. So I'd put it at more than 1 million items, not 1 million items of evidence.
So can we be looking for an auction?
Well, we have ongoing auctions that go on now all the time. So there are items that we auction off on a regular basis. The big issue for us is with the lack of commitment of staffing here, we're not auctioning as often as we should be, we're not destroying and purging as often as we should be, and we allowed things to accumulate that really had no business accumulating in a warehouse.
Like what?
I'd have to say most of the high-risk items that were stored here in large quantities, there was no reason for it to be stored here in large quantities. Most of those high-risk items at a certain point were no longer needed as evidence and could have been destroyed or removed from here, and some of those high-risk items never needed to be stored in a warehouse to begin with. There is a proper way to store certain things, and a warehouse is not always the proper way. So we really had to take a critical look at the way we do things and stop doing it just because it's the way we've always done it.
Can you talk about the site at St. Eves?
What we're doing right now is we are actually going to design the facility by looking at everything we want that facility to do, as well as just the physical structure of the facility. So it will be built, but we're also looking at all the technology that we will need to make this state-of-the-art. Evidence control is not just inventory and tracking and managing, it's also the ability to rapidly retrieve large quantities and large items of evidence. So instead of having to send police officers to go and carry large items and bring them down and put them on a conveyor belt, there are very, very state-of-the-art systems that we can, through the combination of software and other technology, push a button and have that item come to you.
So, just in closing, I think what you see in the evidence warehouse is part of a pattern that probably built up over a protracted period in the D.C. government, where there wasn't really anybody minding the store, if you will, where maybe what worked 30 years ago had been carried into 2007, and items were, just as in the school's warehouse, were kept and stored without regard to how long they would be kept or to whether they should be kept in the first place. And so as we enter this new phase of maintaining evidence and building the new building, I think we will build it with the goal in mind of, just like everything else we're trying to do, not store things, not keep them just to store and keep them, but to make sure there's real purpose behind it. So I think a lot of the story of what was going wrong here will come out as we develop the state-of-the-art evidence warehouse on the St. Elizabeth's campus. So thank you all so much for coming out. Thanks, everyone.